Hello, I'm Doug Benedict, and welcome to the Butler Esports interview series, where we're interviewing sports leaders, owners, and industry experts on the evolving world of esports. Today's interview is with Mike Stubbs. Mike attended Boston College, UK. He's a journalist specializing in esports and gaming for publications such as Forbes, and he's also the author of Esports, the Ultimate Gamer's Guide. Mike is our first international interviewee coming from the United Kingdom. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Very honored to be the first international guest.
We're super excited to have you. So, first question. You attended college for, computer science. Now you're in journalism. What kind of stole you to this side of the world, I guess?
Well, the dream job was always to be a games journalist, because as I imagine a lot of people who like video games think the idea was, I want to play video games for a living. So originally the idea was, let's be a games tester. And then I realized that actually games testing is not playing video games all the time. It's playing the same level of a video game over and over and over and over and over again. And I was like, that doesn't sound fun. And then it kind of twigged, hang on, games journalists just review games. I could do that. The problem was I was always terrible at English at school, to the point where in primary school, they thought that I was dyslexic. Turns out I'm not. I'm just really bad. So that kind of put a dampener on my dreams. But then as I kind of moved into college, which is different over here than your guys' college, it's kind of a little bit like the end of high school. You kind of specialize a little bit more. And I chose to do computer science, thinking, I can still work in the games industry if I do programming, stuff like that. But around that time, I was only doing 3 days a week education. So I was like, hey, I'll try this writing thing. And lied in my Twitter bio, said that I was a freelance games journalist, at which point some site came to me and was like, hey, we get review copies of games. Do you want to write for us? Yeah, I'll do that. So I kind of did the two side by side for quite a while. But yeah, the computer science thing was definitely initially for another path that I was going to take with my life. And while it's not necessarily a massive help in the world of esports, when I was covering more traditional games coverage, like doing the reviews and stuff like that, having kind of a little bit of insight into how the engines that they make the games in work and what it actually takes to make a game, even on the tiny scale that we were doing at school, I think kind of gave me a little bit more perspective compared to other people. It gave me a little bit of a unique angle. And I mean, now in the world of esports, I can get a backstage tour of a big event and kind of look at their production setup and go, oh, this is quite nice, and get a little bit nerdy and talk with the tech guys, which definitely annoys other journalists who are also on the tour. But yeah, no, it's good. And it's also a nice fallback if I can't write anymore for some reason. There's always going to be money in programming.
Absolutely. And I totally identify with your statement about wanting to do game testing and then realizing what it actually is. I feel like that's a thought that goes through everyone's mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's that heartbreaking moment when you realize what a games tester actually does. And I mean, it was when my school actually got a games tester to come in to the school and do a talk, like kind of like for a careers day thing. And that burst the bubble for so many people in kind of my friendship group who was all going to be like, yeah, I just could play games for a living. He was like, no, I've literally sat there and played the same level of the same game millions of times trying to break it. I think his exact words were, it makes you hate games. And I was like, I don't want to do that.
I agree. So in your long career and from where it started, your humble Twitter origins, I suppose, what do you think like the largest area of growth from your perspective has been for esports as an industry, whether that's the technology or the production or the competition?
I think esports has actually expanded in every single way since I started. I only kind of started writing about esports properly around 2013. But the event that got me kind of into writing about it was the International 3, the Dota 2 tournament. I mean, you look back at what that was. That was when it was still in Benaroya in Seattle, this kind of tiny concert hall. That you look back at pictures on Valve's Flickr page and you're like, my God, that looked terrible for like the production values and the stage setup. And even the level of competition that was going on, you kind of, in Dota, the play from the International 2 was once considered this amazing strategy. And you look back and you go, I see that in every other game now. So I think esports as a whole has come on leaps and bounds. And that's obviously come with the VC money that's been invested massively. I think from the thing that has impacted me the most is definitely the teams, the organizations, and the tournament organizers finally learning how to deal with press. It's definitely not perfect. So I'm not going to say that every team has got amazing press relations behind them. But going back to that time, trying to get an interview with anyone was, let's hope they have open Twitter DMs and hope that they see it. Whereas now it's like they've all got PR managers, and you go through official channels. And while that can be very annoying because people will say no a lot more than they used to, at least now you know where they're going. So yeah, esports has rapidly expanded. I think, I do think not even before kind of the pandemic hit, I thought there was a little bit of slowing down in kind of the public facing side of it. So your events kind of leveled out at a level where they're not really growing that much anymore outside of prize pools for the international. But if you look elsewhere, prize pools haven't grown. Viewerships have not massively skyrocketed, at least not before the pandemic hit, which has obviously changed everything. So I think it kind of hit a bit of a plateau, and I think we might start seeing that through industry numbers that come out over the next few years. But yeah, I think esports is in a much better place than it was even when I started, which wasn't all that long ago in the grand scheme of things.
I'll have to agree. So, being on the journalist side in 2013, did you ever encounter, or I guess, maybe there's a better word for this than what I'm going to use, resistance or hesitancy from larger publications to cover things within like the esports world?
Yeah, all the time. I was very lucky when I was first starting out, kind of transitioning from the games industry side of covering, because I started out as a normal games journalist doing the reviews, news, and only got into esports because I love Dota. I was very lucky that when I started doing that, I already had a lot of contacts within the kind of UK games industry scene. So instead of having to go find specialist esports press where I had no contacts to kind of find work, providing I had an interesting enough story, I could go to kind of the editors that I've been working with before and go, look, I know this is a bit outside your remit, but at the end of the day, a good story is a good story. And if they can tie it into games in some way with the esports link, most of them were pretty receptive. I mean, some of my first commissions were on Vice and Playboy, which are places you would not expect to see esports coverage, especially not back in 2013. But they were totally open to it because I'd worked with them on more traditional games coverage. So they knew who I was and they knew that I could write. And when I kind of came to them and said, look, this is the thing that's happening, not really many people in your audience know it's happening, but if they did, I think it would, if you put a good headline on it, kind of saying, oh my God, look how big this is. Back then people would have clicked that because not many people knew what esports was at the time. There were, of course, some publications that were just like, no, I don't know what this is. And esports, obviously, even at that time, had a reputation of if you get one tiny little detail wrong, the community will bite your head off and never ever forgive you. So for a lot of publications, it did take me having to build up a few kind of examples on sites going, look, I know what I'm doing. Your editors might not have a clue how to edit this because you won't understand half the terminology, but providing it's a collaborative process, we can make something good out of this. And for the most part, most people are, providing you've got a good hook on your story, most people are now interested in esports journalism to the point where most of my work the past few years has been more mainstream outlets than specialist esports outlets. It's just you've got to find those stories. No mainstream publication is going to be interested in a match report from the LCS or whatever, because that's just not interesting. That's not a good headline that the people that don't care about the LCS are going to see and click. Whereas if you tell them a story about how the LCS has got however many players there is on 100 grand plus salaries, these people are going to go, oh my God, that's crazy. I'm going to click that. And editors respond to clicks. That's what they need. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the mainstream side of it and how it originally was to what it is.
So that brings me to kind of like a follow-up question then. Is there like a growth in the demand? I know you kind of talked about like maybe a plateau earlier, but in a more recent perspective, is there a growth in that kind of coverage?
In the mainstream, it's constantly getting better. The issue that you'll find for a lot of publications is that they're happy to trial it. So if you're the first person that goes to somewhere, a mainstream place that hasn't tried it, they'll happily go, yeah, we'll do it. What you'll find is that some of them then expect the world. They expect to get millions of clicks, which just isn't feasible. And then they might go off it for 2 or 3 years before they're willing to try it again. And for me, because I'm UK based, so most of the mainstream publications that I work with are UK based. There's only so many in the UK. We're not massive. It's not like the US where I could list off 100 different top tier media publications. And so it kind of comes in peaks and troughs for me a little bit, because there'll be a time where all of my editors are like, yeah, we're willing to try it again. And then there's times where they'll be like, no. I think generally speaking, you're seeing more places do it well. The issue that esports has always seen is when a mainstream publication sees esports and goes, yep, and then sends, while there is value to this in some areas, they'll send one of their normal reporters, one of their staffers who doesn't necessarily know esports. They might know games, but they don't know esports. And that's when they kind of end up with the pieces that people wrongly label as hit pieces because they're not out to get anyone. But they're just from a lack of understanding, because I mean, I'm sure you'll agree as someone who understands esports, it takes a lot of time to understand everything that goes on. I mean, even I wouldn't claim to understand everything that goes on. You talk to me about StarCraft, I've got no idea. So I think that's a problem. And if a organization does that, and then rightly gets criticism from the esports scene for doing it, they won't come back for a while, no matter how much I plead with them and go, I know what I'm doing. Look at this. I've done it elsewhere. A lot of people won't come back to that for a while. But generally, I think you'll struggle to find a mainstream publication, especially one that covers sports as it is. I think you'd struggle to find one that would outright say no to esports coverage if you had a good story for them.
Absolutely. So, you kind of talked about the understanding of, editors compared to you on this subject matter, specifically with esports journalism. Is that the biggest difference with like journalism and of other subject matters? Is it the jargon? Is it the knowledge? Or is it just the culture, if that makes sense?
That is a big difference, because there's very few areas that have the amount of jargon that we do. I mean, even if you look at I guess it's just football for you guys, but what I would call American football. There's lots of jargon around that. Kind of, you could say stuff like, "Oh, you juked him," or "They've thrown the flag," and you're expected to know what that is. But then, if you look at something like League of Legends, there's jargon in that is 10 times more crazy. Like, I could say, "Oh, they just got the Baron, and so they're going to push on to the Nexus." I imagine that 99% of our audience would understand that, even if they're not a League of Legends fan. You turn around to someone who's never even heard of League of Legends and they're like, I've got no idea what that means. Whereas if you say to someone, oh, he just threw a touchdown in the end zone, which is a similar kind of thing, everyone understands what that means, because football is a different level of cultural understanding compared to what esports is. So it can be difficult, especially if you don't have an editor that is willing to work with you. Most of them are, because most editors are more than happy to, if they see a good story, they're more than happy to work with you because they want the good story. And that's both a curse and a kindness, because sometimes things slip through the net and the editor comes back to me and goes, hang on, you told me this was all good. Why am I now getting flack for spelling this bloke's name wrong? And I'm like, oh, I copied that off Wikipedia. It must be wrong. So it can cause more issues, but generally it works out. So yeah, jargon is a big thing. But I think another kind of issue that we find with esports journalism is no one really knows how to do it. No one's figured out how to do it well, and make it sustainable. We see loads of people come in with investment going, oh, I've got $1 million to launch this new esports website. we don't care about figures. We're just going to support you, and we've got a long business plan that's going to work out in the future. And then 6 months down the line, they realize that, oh, we've got like 5% of the views we anticipated because establishing yourself in esports quickly is impossible. And they cut all the funding. And so as a freelancer, that is incredibly hard. So you've got, as much as it's horrible to say that the esports journalism industry is not what you know, it's who you know. That's the case, because if you know the next person that's got investment to start up a site, you can cash in on that. You can go, right, for the next 6 months, I'm eating well because I know they've got $1 million to pour into content. I'll have some of that. And then as soon as they go close, which they inevitably will, apart from some very rare cases, then you're kind of always on the lookout for the next one. I think the problem there is that there's no way of monetizing it safely, because the esports audience loves ad block, which if you're watching this, I would encourage you, please turn off ad block, because I like to eat. But everyone uses ad block, so ads don't make money. People are so wary of sponsored content in esports. They can smell it a mile off if it's not authentic, so you can't make money through that. And all of the big stories are documented on the tournaments, which are free to watch, and on the YouTube channels of the teams, which have 10 times the access that we could get. So it's a difficult one. Hopefully someone will figure out how to monetize it and not lose money on it. But you look at all of the big esports specialist organizations, they've either got an ulterior motive, like Red Bull is entirely marketing to sell their drinks. You look at ESPN, they're just in it for the long game, so that when the media rights become massive in 10 years' time, they can go, well, we've been doing this properly for the last 10 years, side with us. Or you look at kind of the .esports of the world, who do good coverage, but ultimately how sustainable that business model is questionable, and you just have to look at the rates that places like that pay compared to what normal journalists get. Esports journalism is not well paid whatsoever. I can tell you that for a fact.
I mean, I take it from the expert, so I believe you. So, not to talk about money, I guess, but here's kind of a related question. When you're working on a piece, right, what do you spend the majority of your time doing? Where's the hours go? Is it research? Is it contacts? Is it, your personal editing?
It very much depends on the piece. A lot of the work that kind of I try to do, because it's more interesting, not necessarily because it's the most cost effective, is kind of try and find the interesting stories that aren't being reported and do longer form stuff. So you're looking at 1,500 words plus, the stuff that will take a good 10-15 minutes to read, if not more. I mean, I'd love to be able to get into the kind of the 8,000 proper long form stuff, but ain't nobody paying for that right now. That's kind of the stuff that I do the most. And when it's that, it's all about trying to find the contacts that you need, talking to them, and trying to craft the responses that will let you tell your story how it needs to be told. You can always sit down and have a 10-minute interview with a player after they've just come off stage with, right, I want to tackle this story with them. But if they're not in the right mindset to do that, if they haven't been pre-briefed and you're trying to write a story about something that happened a couple of years ago and they've just come off stage in an intense match, their mind's not going to be thinking about it. And so you've got to put the time in to kind of foster that relationship with people, so that you can ultimately get a good story out of them. That's usually the biggest thing for me. I would have said transcription was the biggest time sink, because my God, transcription takes ages and is horrible. But thanks to the advances in technology, there's now auto transcription, which has saved my life. It's fantastic. But yeah, I think that's something that goes underappreciated a lot in esports, is that you actually do need to build these relationships. And while the players are difficult to talk to and get access to, even just interviewing them a couple of times around events within the space of 2 or 3 months can lead to really fruitful stuff. I remember a few years ago, back when Shroud was still on the CSGO team for Cloud9, I interviewed him in Katowice, and then a couple of months later interviewed him again at the ECS finals in London. It was just after PUBG had launched, and Shroud was obviously playing lots of PUBG. And the first interview, I just kind of sacked off the CSGO side of things that I was actually there to report on. And it was just like, I've watched you stream PUBG, what do you think? and he just gave me these amazing answers, and just talked about that for so long. And then the next time I interviewed him, he was like, "Oh, you're the guy who I spoke to about PUBG. Like how are you doing at PUBG?" I'm like, "Well, actually, I'm doing quite well. I'm top 2,000 in Europe." So our next interview, I was like, "Right, we'll do it again. We'll talk about PUBG, but this is kind of the side of thing that I want to hit." And he was like, "Yeah, wicked. Like, I trust you. We've spoken about this before. You didn't screw me over with the last piece where we spoke about PUBG." And it worked out really well. So building those relationships, it is important, and that is ultimately what does take the longest amount of time. I've been told that I'm very lucky in that I can plan an article in my head, so I can sit there, do an interview, and without even looking at the transcription, I can kind of piece together what quotes I want to go where and how the article is going to flow. I've been told a lot of people can't do that. I'm just naturally able to do that. So for me, the actual writing stage doesn't take that long because most of it's already in my head. It's literally just typing it out on paper. And the editing side of things, providing you've got a good editor, that shouldn't take me more than a few hours, because ultimately they will find the mistakes, and unless there's anything major that needs changing, which once you're getting paid to do this full time, you would hope that there isn't many. That's just a couple of hours usually. So yeah, surprisingly, I think building those relationships, talking to people, doing the interviews, and just making sure that you've got everything you need to be able to tell the story correctly, actually takes the longest.
Absolutely. Sounds like you've had some awesome experiences with, various members of
Oh,
the industry.
the stories I could tell.
Oh,
I
I'm
was
sure.
fortunate enough to go out to Cancun for the ECS event that was held in the Hard Rock Hotel, and there was I think 3 journalists out there, and we was all in the same hotel as all the players, and there was some stories from that I think some very rich people might be very angry if I told. So I'll stay away from those.
I won't ask. So do you have, not that I'm asking you to show favoritism, but do you have a favorite title, organization, tournament that you like to cover specifically?
I mean, right now, I'm loving covering Valorant. I've fallen in love with Valorant, which is surprising. There's kind of what I've always done is specialised in the esports industry generally. Because I'm mostly right for that mainstream audience, there's no point me knowing the ins and outs of the League of Legends meta because the mainstream audience is not going to care if, I don't know, a Jarvan is picked over a Orianna or something like that. I don't even know if that's a thing that would happen. That's how little I know about the meta. Because I don't need to know that. So I've always tried to cover everything, which has kind of made me a bit of I don't really love a particular thing. I mean, Dota was my first esports love, and there's always a little bit there. But this season, I just haven't watched anything. But Valorant's really got me. I kind of, once it was announced, I was like, right, there's an opportunity here. I could go big. It's Riot, so it's going to do well. I wanted to do the same with Overwatch when that launched. However, I was blacklisted by Blizzard at the time, so that made getting access really difficult. So that kind of didn't happen. But I saw this as an opportunity. He was like, right, I'll play it if I like it. I'm prepared to go big in it and try and kind of become one of the biggest names, journalist-wise, reporter-wise, in the scene, because that can lead to more opportunities to branch out into other areas. Played it and just loved it. The beta, I played far too much of. I even spent money on the beta, which is very unusual for me. And ever since, I've really enjoyed it. So at the minute, Valorant is my thing. But as for kind of generally, I don't necessarily have a favorite team or like an organization, a team, or a tournament to work with. I have favorite PRs. I have favorite PR companies, and I have favorite internal PRs. And losing a good PR from a company can be the difference between me covering you every week and me never covering you again. A good PR. The thing that I think a lot of, especially up and coming journalists in esports, get wrong is they think that you're there to help PRs. That's not true. PRs are there to make your life easier. If PRs don't make your life easier, don't work with them. If a PR is blocking you access to a player you know you can DM on Twitter and get them to go on the record, DM on Twitter and get them to go on the record. People seem to think that they're obliged to PRs because the PR has taken the time to contact them, which is probably just putting you in a database of 1,000 other journalists and sending you a press release where your name is auto inputted by some fancy technology and it's not actually addressed to you personally. They think they're obliged to cover it. That's not the case. So yeah, I mean, this might be a little bit niche to talk about, but people like the Story Mob, which is founded by the former head of global comms for ESL, the former head of PR for Riot US or the LCS, and a lady from Bitcraft, which is a investment fund from Germany. They're brilliant. I've known Anna and Nicola for years in their previous role, and I know that I can go to them and go, right, I know you've got this client. I need an interview with this player. I need it with this in this time frame, and they'll go, yep, we'll tell you if we can do it. If we can, the next email you will receive will be telling you when it is. There's no back and forth going, oh, we're not sure. Oh, can you send over questions in advance so that because that level of trust is there between us. Another one, Swipe Right in the UK, they do PR for Excel and Team Vitality. They make my life so easy. They'll come to me with a personalised email going, look, we want you to put this on Forbes. Here's why we think you should do it. It's an interesting angle, and they do that. So I'll cover Excel and Vitality 10 times more than I'll cover. I don't know. Let's not name names, but another team that doesn't have a PR that is like that. Because if you're making my job more difficult, why would I do that? You need, especially as a freelancer, my time is quite valuable, and if I'm having to work with PR to even get an idea green lighted, then that's an issue because I'm now in the fortunate position where I'm kind of a well enough known quantity that I can reach out to the players and the PRs beforehand before I pitch an article to an editor, so that I know I can go to the editor and say, this is locked in, this interview will happen, which stops me looking like a muppet if it doesn't happen. And so I can do that. And if I'm then having to chase a PR to get even the confirmation of an interview, when I'm not making any money directly off that, that's not something I'm prepared to do because it's not making money directly. And I quite like money.
Absolutely. Don't we all? So, bringing this all to more recent times, global events, since the beginning of this entire, COVID-19 pandemic, have you found any like interesting trends, information, stories that have kind of come out of this esports side that maybe you didn't expect to find, or you did, but you didn't think you would be able to, write about it?
I mean, one thing that I kind of have covered a little bit on Forbes from the pandemic side is esports betting is booming right now. Gambling on esports, obviously a little bit weird over in the States with your crazy gambling laws, but over kind of the rest of the world, esports betting has kind of been a relatively big thing for a while, and I think you see that with the sponsorships that you see in esports. And I've dabbled in it as well. I occasionally bet. I think I've got some good knowledge of the scene. I think I can make some money, and then inevitably don't. But yeah, it's been a thing, but it's been a relatively small thing compared to the large gambling industry. But now that all the live sporting events are dead, but esports can still go on, there's been crazy revenue increases. Lookbox, which is a specialist esports bookmaker, they've done so well that they've had millions more in investment over the last few months and are now going public. The UK Gambling Commission released a report on the impact of COVID that said year on year the increase of esports betting was like 2,000% because of the increase over the last few months of the pandemic. So that's going to be a really interesting trend to follow to see if that keeps going when this is kind of all over and when sports do come back, because obviously with the legalization that's happening over in the US, it could become a massive factor. There's both positives and negatives to that. There's obviously going to be more money pumping into the esports industry through gambling sponsorships because everyone's going to want a piece of the pie. But it's also going to bring in more match fixing opportunities. And that's going to be fascinating to watch, I think. So while at the minute that's just kind of a good business story of, oh, look, all these people are making lots of money, well done for them. give it a few years, and you could look at COVID as a major turning point in the esports industry for what could potentially be a big wave of future match fixing stories and opportunities that are coming through. And I think that's something that a lot of people haven't really thought about when they've just looked at these revenues and gone, "Oh my God, look at all the money."
Absolutely. It's funny that is what you bring up, because we've heard that before on this interview series, and I've heard about it myself. And so I believe you is essentially what I'm saying. So kind of, I don't know if you were given advice when you were first getting into all of this, but if you were, what was it? What was the most helpful thing that you've been told when, jumping into this esports journalism?
So this kind of goes back to what my more games industry journalism days, but I think it still rings true, and it's something that I still tell people, even now. It's just a network. I was fortunate enough that when I was still kind of writing at a volunteer level and not getting paid for it, I was fortunate enough to join a site that had really good links within the UK games scene. They would get invites to kind of the exclusive press events for preview coverage and stuff like that. And my editors would tell me, look, we need the coverage. That's what you're there to do. But make sure you go out every night with everyone that goes out. Make sure you have the meals. Make sure you talk to everyone, because ultimately they're the people that are going to be paying you. You meet so many people. It's so important to talk to them, because if you're a freelancer, having a relationship where they can put a face to the name is 10 times more likely to get you commission. And even if you're looking for a full-time job, people are more likely to hire people that they know. And that rings true in esports so much. Esports definitely has a problem with, especially esports journalism often has a problem with its kind of elitism, and kind of the boys clubs that are already established. And it can feel like breaking in is so tough. I have sat in press rooms with international events, people that I've never met before, and just kind of gone, should I go and talk to that group of people? The answer is always yes, because 90% of the time, everyone in esports journalism is lovely, and they just want to talk about the game and be nerdy and talk about upcoming stories that they've got that they're excited about. But it can feel very intimidating. So my advice is just get to event, like when everything is back to normal, get to events, worm your way into whatever parties and gatherings and whatever you can. Network, make friends with the PR. Remember, they're not actually your friends. It's a professional relationship where you're both trying to get something out of each other. So no matter how nice they are to you, definitely not your friend. You can still go drinking with them, and build those relationships, because they'll help you get coverage down the line. Like I said earlier, build the relationships with the players if you can, because a player will be, if you're in a packed press room and they've got 10 interview requests and it's up to them who they pick, if they spot a familiar face, they're going to go with that one. Network. Speak to as many people as you can. Reach out to me on Twitter. Tell me who you are. Tell me why I should care. Who knows? Maybe you'll see me at an event and you can go, "Hey, DM'd you on Twitter before." And that's just how you do it. It can be terrifying, especially for when I first started this. I was very socially inept. I was quite an introvert, which is now the exact opposite. I love all the attention on me. But it can be difficult to do, and sometimes you just got to try and push past that, as difficult as it can be, just to try and meet people.
Absolutely. So you wrote a book, right?
Yes.
Well, first off, what was the experience? I'm sure it's completely different from journalism, but on top of that, like what led you to write this book?
So it was actually not necessarily my decision. That this company basically struck a deal with a big publisher, and they said, right, we will write these books about games for you. They did one on retro games, they did one on kind of upcoming games, and one of them was on esports. They thought that their games experts in the office would be able to write that, and then they realized, oh no, esports is very confusing. It's not just another type of games. So they got in another writer. That writer looked at the task, said, yeah, I'll do it. And then when it got to actually writing the thing, they was like, hang on, I might be a little bit out of my depth on this. So they got rid of them, and then they were kind of scrambling. I think they had 2.5 months until they needed to go to press. And a friend of mine heard about the opportunity and was like, "Hey, this has got your name written all over it. Send them an email." So I did, and it was literally within 2 days. I think it was from me making first contact to them going, "Yes, this is what we need. Just write it." So I had about from getting the kind of commission to do it to having to submit for print date, I think I had 2 months. The problem is that if you're a good freelancer and you're planning ahead, generally you like to have a week or two's work in advance. So I actually wrote most of it in the space of about 6 weeks, if that, to be honest. But yeah, kind of the idea for the book was it was aimed at a more teenage audience, to kind of give them an overview of the entire esports world, whilst also looking at avenues into it as a career path. So not only was it meant to be something that you would read if you're interested in esports and you want to find out more, it was also meant to be kind of give a few tips on how to get into the industry and what potential there is there to try and improve the image of the industry and kind of the global marketplace for jobs. I think we did that quite well. We were unfortunately hit with a few production delays, which meant that my book launched just as Fortnite was becoming the biggest thing in the world, and it didn't even mention Fortnite because when we went to press, the Battle Royale mode had been out a week, and nobody could have seen that massive rise coming so quickly. But with esports, that's always going to happen. As great as writing a book is, the lead times are so long that you're always going to be out of date. But I'm still very proud of it. I think that for the audience that we wanted to hit, and for the kind of goals that we had for it, I think we did those excellently well, especially on the tight turnaround that we was. And the book is quite, I was going to say graphic, but that's not the right word, graphical, in that it's got loads of imagery and stuff like that. So the people that I worked with on designing it, and my good friend Joe Brady, who's an esports photographer, who, when the people came to me and was like, "Oh, we also need images for all of this," I literally just sent him a message on Twitter. I went, "Joe, how much will it cost for you to give me full rights to all of your images you've ever taken?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'll do you a solid." So yeah, without those other guys, it wouldn't have been possible to do. And while ultimately it's my name that's on the spine of the book as the author, it really was a team effort. And I think it's an experience that not many authors of a book would have had, to be plunged in at the deep end with 6 weeks to write something and source images and get it all designed. So it was a crazy time. Now I am looking at doing a proper book with proper time frames, a proper story to tell, and not writing it within 6 weeks. But we'll see how that goes. I mean, we just saw the Red Eye book launch, and I know both Paul and the guy who kind of co-wrote it with Paul. I know them both very well, and I would like to see more stuff like that. It's amazing that there isn't more books on esports, because there's so many incredible stories in esports that you cannot tell in 1,000 words. And like I said earlier, trying to get more than 1,500 to 2,000 words commissioned for a single story in esports is so difficult. And so books seem like the ultimate way of doing it, because there's always going to be money in books, no matter if it's terrible or not. They can be quite cheap to produce if you find the right publisher. So I mean, I've got ideas floating in my head all the time of books that I want to do. And hopefully now that book's happened, we might see some more publishers getting on board with it, and doing it. But that will be a time will tell, I think.
You answered my next question after telling me that crazy compact story about getting it done. I was going to say, if you had more time, would you do it again? But
oh yeah, I would do it again. If I had more time to work on it, there would have been a few things that I changed. There were certain parts where I was kind of put in charge of any physical people pictures, because if you turn around to someone who doesn't necessarily know esports that well and show them a picture of 5 Korean guys, you get them to identify which one Faker is. They won't have a clue. But the design team was more responsible for in-game screenshots and stuff like that. And there was a few that I thought, it's a bit dated. That's kind of not what the game looks like anymore. And the kind of the structure of the book was already there. Once I'd come in. There was a few changes that I made. Like originally they had a section on Titanfall 2 in there. I've never seen Titanfall 2 match be played competitively in my life. So I did make a few decisions, but there were a few things in there that it was already decided that they needed to be in there and those sections needed to be that long. And a lot of it was more forward-looking things, so I don't necessarily blame the people that did it. But when you dedicate 6 pages to Heroes of the Storm, when League of Legends is getting 6 pages as well, and you can see that, hang on, Heroes of the Storm is probably in its last days here. League of Legends is still growing. Why are we doing this? So there's definitely things I would change. But as I said, I still think the core of the book at the time when we released it was still phenomenal. I think that there's still a lot of value to it right now. But given the opportunity, I would love to do a follow-up of it right now and just go, look, here's what the industry is right now. Here's all the different games. Here's all the different jobs. Here's everything like that, because I think it'd be a much more interesting read, because I think the variety of games has become a lot more interesting since I wrote it.
Absolutely. So, talking about writing your book or whatever, maybe this question will help you out in planning. But the next 3 to 5 years, you have a very unique perspective on all of this. What do you see not only your side of the esports industry looking like, but just the esports industry as a whole? Where do you see it going?
I'll start with kind of the esports journalism side and the content side, because I have some thoughts on that. That I'm hopeful that sooner or later someone will figure out how to monetize esports written content and do it well. I mean, to be fair to them, Dexerto seem to be doing an amazing job right now. I know those guys quite well. Mad respect to what they've done. But as much as they have found a way to monetize esports content, that's also backed up with a lot of kind of YouTuber and the kind of neo-celebrity side of things. It's very similar to kind of the gossip mags and stuff like that of yesteryear. They've kind of taken that on for a new generation. So while they are making money off esports content and doing incredibly well, I mean, you only got to look at their YouTube output to see that that's where they're focusing on for the video side of things. I think that if someone does want to remain specialist esports and only be esports, there needs to be a new content model to figure out, or a new monetization model to figure out how that's going to work. I've always been a supporter of subscription models in journalism. That's not going to work in esports because everything else is free. So someone's got to come up with that. I'm hopeful that within the next 5 years that will happen. Otherwise, there's probably going to be a massive contraction in the journalism side of things, because it's just not sustainable anymore. Sooner or later, all those investors that come in with the $1 million to make a new site that keep people going for the next 6 months, they're going to realize eventually that there's this string of sites that haven't worked, and that investment's going to stop. So there's going to be a big change. I can't tell you what that change is right now. If I was, I'd be a multi-millionaire within the next 2 years. And that's for people much smarter than me to try and figure out. But it's going to be interesting. I hope that the mainstreams support us more. And I think that is starting to happen. I think the work that ESPN has done in the world of getting mainstreams to cover it has been absolutely invaluable. I would fear to think where the journalism industry would be if ESPN hadn't have come in as well as they did and as big as they did, because that definitely got a lot more people interested. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting few years for journalism. I hope that some writers can really establish themselves as top tier writers. Something that I've long said, no disrespect to anybody in the industry, but I got into into games journalism because there was writers that really inspired me. A guy called Simon Parkin, who wrote for Eurogamer, now writes, I think he's a contributor at the New Yorker, so he's doing actual journalism. He's a phenomenal writer. He is a naturally talented writer who wrote some incredible game stories. Christian Donlan, who is still at Eurogamer, a man I've been fortunate enough to learn from and speak to a few times. He inspired me to write about games. I remember a story of his where he played L.A. Noire with his dad, who was a cop in Los Angeles during that time, and it was one of the best things I've ever read. They are naturally talented writers. You will find very few people who are naturally talented who can put a sentence together where every word is perfect and they haven't even thought about it. And you can just read that and go, my God, I would never have even thought to put those words together in that order. And to them, it's literally just coming out of their brain. I don't think we've got one of those in esports yet, at least not from what I've seen. There are people that work incredibly hard. You look at kind of the Jacob Wolfs, he is one of the best reporters in the industry. There's few people who can hold up a contact list as well as him. But what he's not someone who will craft a beautiful sentence using exactly the right words. Tyler over at ESPN as well, amazing long form stories. He gets the best out of people. But the sentence structure and kind of the flowing prose, I don't think we've got one of them in esports yet. And I think if someone does come along like that, you can build an entire team around them. And maybe that person is the person that finds a monetizable way to do it, because I think that people will read that. And that might be the key to pushing that viewership numbers over the edge that it needs to become profitable. So we'll see. My hope is that that happens. And if you think you are that person, slide into my DMs so that I can make that happen. But yeah, that'll be interesting. As for kind of esports as a whole, where does it go? I think, like I kind of said, there's been a bit of a contraction. I don't think we'll see the rapid growth that we've seen. Kind of if we look back over the kind of previous 5 years up until the last couple, the growth was immense. I think you look at it now and you see the Overwatch League that's maybe not in the greatest position compared to what people thought it would be at this stage, both through facts of their own making and others. You look at kind of the big leagues that would have franchised, either have or are in the process of doing so now. So those franchising opportunities that were going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread are now all gone. And I mean, outside of, it's obviously hard to predict what the next big esports will be, but outside of Valorant, there isn't kind of that game that you look at that's in development and go, yeah, that's going to be it. There isn't really the game that you look at that's kind of early in its life cycle and go, yeah, that's going to be big. And I think a lot of the games that were like that a few years ago, you look at the Rainbow Sixes, you look at the Rocket Leagues, that kind of came out of nowhere, and even the Fortnites to a point, and that kind of came out of nowhere and did become decent-sized esports. I think their growth has stopped despite it being quite steady. We're not seeing kind of the increases year on year from those titles, where over the last 3 to 4 years they have had steady growth. And there doesn't seem to. It's always hard to predict with stuff like that. No one would have predicted Rainbow Six would become one of the biggest esports in the world when it launched, and everyone panned it. It was kind of a botched launch. I think that we have to find more games like that. And from what I've seen, there isn't any coming out that really tick those boxes. But again, you tell me prior to Rocket League going free on PS Plus that it was going to be one of the biggest esports in the world. You tell me prior to Fortnite introducing Battle Royale, it was going to be one of the biggest things in the world. I mean, you can go on Eurogamer right now and read an article from me from a few years ago where I literally said I was taken on a press trip to the first ever Rainbow Six Siege finals, like the Pro League finals. The PR kind of sold it to me as, hey, we're going to Cologne. You might be able to get some player interviews. It'll be great. Yeah, okay, I'll go. We fell asleep in the studio because there was a 4-hour tech delay. We lit like in the tiny ESL Cologne studio, which was pitch black for the spectator seats because it was a like in studio broadcast. We literally fell asleep, and then managed to watch about a game and a half of action before we had to go get our flight because of the delays. And I was like, I'm never watching this game again. This game's as good as dead after that. And now look at it; it's one of the best esports in the world, and I'm not afraid to say that I think the Siege community is probably one of the best in the world around the esports side of things. I love nothing more than going to the Six Invitational in Montreal because providing you stick around the kind of Siege family is such a welcoming environment. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how things play out, and we're always going to have games like that, but I'm a little bit worried that there's none on the horizon.
Extremely insightful. So our last question that we ask everybody we have on, because we love having these amazing perspectives from people all over the world now, right? Do you have like one or two other industry, leaders, experts, people who are in there that you think would be great candidates for us to interview, for us to look at and get a new perspective?
Um, I mean, kind of to tie into the world that I work in, talk to Anna Rozandowicz or Nicola Piggott from the Story Mob. They are two ladies with incredible knowledge of the communications scene in esports. You don't get much bigger than the head of global comms for ESL, the head of PR for the NALCS, merging together to create a company that now reps the likes of G2, Team Liquid, Evil Geniuses. So many major companies use them, and there's a reason for that. Those ladies, they have incredible stories. I've heard them many a time before, some of which probably are not broadcastable, but some of them definitely are. They can offer insight. Also from the PR world, Kirsty Enfielder and Swipe Right PR. She's someone who, like me, started off in the world of traditional video games. She worked for a PR firm doing normal video games coverage, started up her own firm with the idea of doing traditional video games coverage, and then kind of fell into the world of esports and now specializes in it. I think it should be fascinating to learn from that angle again, because getting into esports is very difficult. Getting into games is a little bit easier, and making the jump once you've got that experience, that's doable. If you want to talk on the writing side, the editing side, Darren over at ESPN, the editor of ESPN Esports, brilliant to work with, very good insight into kind of what a major outlet like that is looking for. Over here in the US, Stephen Saunders, who I believe is UK deputy editor for ESPN, not esports, like the whole of ESPN. He's kind of led the UK side coverage for esports. He's a fascinating man to sit down with, because you don't get to that high up in ESPN without knowing a thing or two about media. So he's great. And then kind of further afield, I mean, if you want to go quite lofty with your ambitions, try and get Ralph Reichart, the CEO of ESL, on the phone, because that man is very interesting to speak to. And I think that there's so many good people within esports that you could reach out to. The one thing is, do not look on LinkedIn for them. If you type in esports in LinkedIn, you'll find so many jokers that have no idea what they're doing. Stay away from them. And for anyone watching, if you've got esports consultant in your LinkedIn bio, get rid of it, because that will do more harm than good. But I'm just trying to think who else would be good. Chris Hanna from the Esports Observer. If you want a B2B look at esports journalism, there's no one better. He kind of started esports B2B journalism, and has sold his company to technically to Condé Nast, which is one of the biggest publishing companies in the world. So they don't get much better than that. From the B2B side, there's so many great people. I could give you a list of about 100 people if I wanted to.
Oh, it's been a great list.
But yeah, no, I think the great thing about esports is, outside of a few bad apples here and there, so many people are willing to help, because you're not in esports unless you love esports. Unless you love video games and you love esports, you're not in it. And so everyone is passionate about the same things. And we all want to see the industry grow. We all know that there is kind of this weird mentality of us against the world in esports, which it really isn't the case, and is going to bite us in the ass more than it's going to help us eventually. We need to get rid of that. But because of it, there's this camaraderie within esports where you can walk up to someone drunk out of your mind at a party who you've never met before, decide that they're your new best friend just because you're really drunk and you've met them, and you will be able to have a genuine conversation with them about anything that you are there to do over that weekend, because esports is such a great place. So yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant place to be. Everyone's worth speaking to, apart from the LinkedIn warriors.
Absolutely. Well, that was our last question, like I said. So thank you for your fantastic insight and your perspective. This was amazing, and it was amazing to talk to you. Thank you, author, journalist Mike Stubbs, for your time. Stay safe, stay well, and go Dogs.
Thank you very much for having me.